ערב טוב כולם, אנחנו ניגשים מיד למושב הראשון. נבואה ומוסר כאתגר חברתי, בהגותו של השל. אני חנן אלכסנדר מאוניברסיטת חיפה במכון ולניב בירושלים, ולכבוד הוא לי לעמוד בראש המושב הראשון הזה, מושב הפתיחה שלנו. ניתן לאנשים קצת להיכנס. יש עוד כיסאות. לפני שניגש לענייננו, אני חושב שיש גם לברך גם את האכסניה, גם מכון שכטר למדעי היהדות, שהשתתפו ביחד איתנו במכון לנביר בכנס החשוב הזה, וגם לאלה שמובילים או שהובילו בשנים רבות את אשכול לתרבות וזהות יהודית במכון ולניב בירושלים, את הרב פרופסור נפתלי רוטנברג ואת דוקטור אבינועם רוזנק, שאני ראיתי אותו לא מזמן נכנס פה לחדר, שקיבלו על עצמם במשך לא מעט שנים בעצם לחשוף בפני הציבור הישראלי את ההגות של הזרמים ביהדות הלא אורתודוקסיים וגם של האורתודוקסיה הליברלית האמריקאית. גם כנס על הרב סולובייצ'יק שנערך לו לפני לא מעט שנים, גם הכנס על התנועה הרפורמית, כנס מאוד מאוד חשוב שנערך לפני לא מעט שנים, גם כנס על התנועה הקונסרבטיבית, בהגות קונסרבטיבית, גם זה. והנה עכשיו אנחנו מגיעים להגותו של הרב פרופסור השל, שבבינה מסוימת הוא היה בכל המישורים הללו. הוא בא כמובן ממקום חסידי מאוד חשוב, הוא לימד גם ב-HUC, הוא לימד גם ב-JTS, הוא היה במידה מסוימת הרב של כל יהדות ארצות הברית, ואם כן נכון שגם אנחנו במכון לנביר, אנחנו ניקח לעצמנו להיכנס בשיתוף פעולה עם כל החברים, להתדיין ולדון ולחקור את הנושא החשוב הזה. המושב הראשון, כפי שנאמר, נבואה ומוסר כאתגר חברתי, יש לנו שתי מרצים, פרופסור אדוארד קפלן, who's the Kevi and Hortense Kaiserman Professor in Humanities in the Department of Romance Studies and Comparative Literature at Brandeis University. He will speak to us on the topic, the blue flame of meditation, contemplation, and activism in A.J. Heschel. לאחר מכן, הרב דוקטור אלכסנדר אבן חן, מרצה למחשבת ישראל במכון שכטר למדעי היהדות. הנושא שלו, למה אלוהים לא עצר את הרכבות העמוסות ביהודים המובלים לטבח, על המאבק הנבואי, חברתי, מוסרי של אברהם, יהושע, השל. 20 דקות לכל מרצה, ואחר כך אנחנו נפנה גם לשאלות ודיון בקהל. פרופסור קפלן, בבקשה.
First, I want to thank you for the honor of following the Hanukkah candle lighting with some thoughts on Abraham Heschel's hermeneutics of flame and light. There is a basic tension in Abraham Heschel's thought, he would call it a creative polarity, between contemplation and activism, between public responsibility and the private inwardness of the thinker and the person of prayer. Heschel integrated both. His allegiance to solitude, study, and radical amazement nourished his civic responsibility, for which he became widely known in the 1960s. Although the purpose of his essay, quote, entitled "The Reasons for My Involvement in the Peace Movement," was to trace the genealogy of his ethical and even political commitments, he draws an unequivocal portrait of himself as a contemplative. And here I'm quoting. For many years, I lived by the conviction that my destiny is to serve in the realm of privacy, to be concerned with the ultimate issues and involved in attempting to clarify them in thought and word. Loneliness was both a burden and a blessing, and above all, indispensable to achieving a kind of stillness in which perplexities could be faced without fear. I'm continuing the quotation. Three events changed my attitude. One was the countless onslaughts upon my inner life, depriving me of the ability to sustain inner stillness. The second event was the discovery that indifference to evil is worse than evil itself. The third event that changed my attitude was my study of the prophets of ancient Israel. Heschel combined these vocations. As a writer and interpreter of the Hebrew prophets, he eloquently evoked spiritual inwardness while he stirred the conscience of his contemporaries. Here we focus on the meditative dimension of Heschel's appeal to readers, the goal of which was nothing less than to prepare us to meet God. The undercurrent of loneliness and solitude in Heschel's writings introduces a longing that only the divine can fulfill. His 1945 essay on prayer begins on a somber note, and I'm quoting. The thirst for companionship, which drives us so often into error and adventure, indicates the intense loneliness from which we suffer. We are alone even with our friends. The smattering of understanding which a human being has to offer is not enough to satisfy our need for sympathy. In the hour of greatest agony, we are alone. It is such a sense of solitude which prompts the heart to seek the companionship of God. End of quote. Heschel first published these words in the Review of Religion, January of 1945, before reiterating them in Man's Quest for God. Its autobiographical pathos is unmistakable. While pursuing doctoral studies at the University of Berlin, Heschel wrote Yiddish poems in which the conflict between solitude versus solidarity is a fundamental component. The central section of Der Shem HaMeforesh Mensch, God's Ineffable Name, Man, published in 1933, is entitled Between Me and the World, Zwischen mir und Welt, and it evokes an existential paradox. Closeness to God can alienate us from the world. The book's epigraph, and you please forgive me my pronunciation, Hab gebeten Wunders anstatt Glück und du hast die mir gegeben, as translated by Morton Leifman, I prayed for wonders instead of happiness, and you gave them to me. That summarizes his life's fundamental contradiction. The plural of Wunders most certainly evokes the mature thinker's now familiar categories of wonder, awe, and radical amazement as antecedents of faith. In either case, the young poet recognizes an intrinsic conflict between God's demands and personal happiness. Heschel devoted his final and most confessional book, A Passion for Truth, published in 1973 after his death, to three model solitaries, the Kutzker Rebbe, Soren Kierkegaard, and Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav. These three spiritual radicals mirror Heschel's self-portrait. For example, a taste for solitude informs Heschel's early attraction to Rabbi Nachman, the tormented master in Arthur Green's bold and insightful portrait. Perhaps Heschel even discovered a Jewish analog of monastic withdrawal, as suggested in a footnote. I'm quoting the footnote. I recall that in the prayer rooms of Rabbi Nachman's followers in Warsaw, there were narrow cells in which individuals could retire for an hour or more, since their homes were overcrowded and the surrounding fields offered no seclusion. Beyond the search for a tranquil study space, Heschel understood that solitude, quote, a common practice among mystically inclined Jews, was a necessary prelude, I'm quoting, for a soul can create only when alone, and some are chosen for the flowering that takes place in the dark avenues of the night. They may live on the brink of despair, alternating between a longing for fellowship and privacy. This inner conflict, the flowering that takes place in the dark avenues of the night, can bridge the ethical and the contemplative, which is the main thrust of my paper. Referring to the Shoah, Heschel insists upon our social responsibility. Quote, "Can a man feel mercy if he has never experienced terror? The Katzker is very close to us during the night. A night that lasts all day and opens up the horror that other people felt and saw, after which they died." Heschel had indeed endured, as stated in his essay on the peace movement, countless onslaughts upon his inner life, depriving him of the ability to sustain inner stillness. The Katzker Rebbe, who withdrew from his community for the last 20 years of his life, suggests that Heschel, too, felt hounded by ambivalence toward his public renown. A series of rhetorical questions provides a glimpse of Heschel's irreducible struggles, and I'm quoting. And Heschel is talking about the Katzker. Did he fear that external fame would accelerate inner decay? Did he suffer from contradictions within himself? Or did he bemoan the fact that those who came to him were mostly admirers, not followers? He knew that he was illumined, but did he succeed in illumining others? And did he withdraw from the world because he thought his task is to share the solitude of God? The end of the quotation. Heschel did not withdraw. Loneliness and the severe quest for personal integrity, a passion for truth, after all, were Heschel's own sacrifices, his contribution to help alleviate God's solitude. To prepare seekers for insight and faith, Heschel, the lyrical writer, sought to evoke moments of illumination. He combined traditional sources, his own voice, and numerous proof texts, a mode of polyphonic discourse expertly analyzed by Michael Marmor. Heschel elaborated his most precise analyses of spiritual knowledge in the 4 numinous chapters 13 to 16 of God in Search of Man. A sequence of 3 short paragraphs traces the trajectory from despair to illumination. So I begin the quotations now. The first paragraph. "Only those who have gone through days on which words were of no avail, on which the most brilliant theories jarred the earth like mere slang, only those who have experienced ultimate not knowing, the voicelessness of a soul struck by wonder, total muteness, are able to enter the meaning of God, a meaning greater than the mind." Second paragraph. "There is a and this is a sequence, there is a loneliness in us that hears. When the soul parts from the company of the ego and its retinue of petty conceits, when we cease to exploit all things, but instead pray the world's cry, the world's sigh, our loneliness may hear the living grace beyond all power." And the third paragraph. I'm saying this to kind of break the spell, because this is really almost unbearable. The final paragraph of the sequence. "We must first peer into the darkness, feel strangled and entombed in the hopelessness of living without God, before we are ready to feel the presence of his living light." These intense pages are among the most powerful Heschel ever wrote. His hybrid discourse reinforces personal testimony with long quotations from the Rambam, the Zohar, and other texts, classical and recondite. Each source seems to possess equal authority. Among these somber echoes of ultimate not knowing, Heschel becomes aware of a still small voice. Such is his courageous faith. But what is the loneliness within us that hears? It must be the divine pathos, God's concern for humankind. We may be lonely, but we are not alone. Heschel's task as religious thinker is to construct faith and certainty from those moments of illumination. Ultimately, Heschel weaves moments of intuition into the fabric of tradition, as he states in God in Search of Man, quoting, "Private inspirations prepare us to accept what the prophets convey. They enable us to understand the question to which revelation is an answer." We now reach Heschel's analysis of esoteric insight, and the title of my paper, The Blue Flame of Meditation. Citing the Rambam's epistemology, Heschel both evokes and interprets images of light that might bridge human intuition and divine transcendence. He begins in his own voice. I'm quoting, "Man's walled mind has no access to a ladder upon which he can, on his own strength, rise to knowledge of God. Yet his soul is empowered with translucent windows that open to the beyond. And if he rises to reach out to God, it is a reflection of the divine light in him, in us, that gives him the power of such yearning. We are at times ablaze against and beyond our own power. And unless man's soul is dismissed as an insane asylum, the spectrum analysis of that ray is evidence for the truth of his insight." The end of quotation. No, it's not the end of the quotation. Excuse me, this is the next paragraph. "For God is not always silent." Still Heschel's voice. Okay? This is Heschel's testimony. "For God is not always silent, and man is not always blind. His glory fills the world. God's Spirit hovers over the waters. There are moments in which, to use a Talmudic phrase, heaven and earth kiss each other." Heschel's optical metaphor of a spectrum analysis of a ray of divine light is a heuristic device enabling a theological judgment. He advances his epistemology by quoting a long passage from the Guide of the Perplexed that distinguishes the degrees of human receptivity to illumination. And this is Heschel quoting the Rambam. "Do not imagine that these great mysteries are completely and thoroughly known to any of us. By no means. Sometimes truth flares up before us with daylight brightness, but soon it is obscured by the limitations of our material nature and social habits, and we fall into a darkness almost as black as that in which we were before. We are thus like a person whose surroundings are from time to time lit up by lightning. With others, again, there are long and short intermissions between flashes of illumination. And lastly, there are those who are not granted that their darkness be illumined by a flash of lightning, but only, as it were, by the gleam of some polished object or the like of it such as the stones and phosphorescent substances which shine in the dark night. And even that sparse light which illuminates us is not continuous, but flashes and disappears as if it were the gleam of the ever-turning sword. I'm going to skip my analysis of that, but really stands up to detailed analysis. To conclude, we examine how Heschel hopes or expects the common practice of candle lighting on Shabbat and festivals, particularly appropriate at this Hanukkah season, to help actualize the mystical potentials of the gleam of some polished object or the like of it. I suggest that we read this paragraph as a meditative process, a prose poem, that melds Heschel's discourse with quotations from Psalms, Isaiah, and especially the Zohar. The text is both straightforwardly expressive and analytical, as it differentiates the divine from the human while suggesting how both can be conjoined. I call it the blue flame of meditation. I'm quoting from Heschel. In the flame which rises from a burning coal or candle, there are two lights, one white and luminous, and the other black or blue. The white light is the higher of the two and rises steadily. The two are inseparably connected, the white resting and being enthroned upon the black. The blue or black base is in turn attached to something beneath it, which keeps it in flame and impels it to cling to the white light above. It is a connecting link between the white light to which it is attached above and the concrete body to which it is attached below. The impulse through which this blue is set aflame comes only from man, from humankind. And there's an endnote to the Zohar. The blue light is not caught up by the white light until it has first begun to mount. But when it does so, forthwith the white light rests upon it. In regard to white light, it is said, and he's quoting from Psalms, O Lord, keep thou not silence, hold not thy peace, and be not still, O Lord. In regard to the blue light, it is said, and Heschel quotes from the Zohar, ye that stir the Lord to remember, take no rest. Excuse me, that's from Isaiah, so the endnote to the Zohar. Heschel's vertical reverie on the candle flame, as practiced by the French philosopher of imagination, Gaston Bachelard, can accordingly inspire mystical insight. The white flame is the divine, inseparable from the black or blue flame of materiality. Heschel's meditation accordingly combines text and testimony, metaphor, intuition, and revelation. Heschel thus confirms his prophetic mission, quoting, the impulse through which this blue is set aflame comes only from man, end of quote. Heschel's religious thinking through metaphors should open our mind and heart to the reality of God, inciting us to share his certainty. But that is another topic ably and persistently developed by Gordon Tucker and others. Thank you very much.